How's it going, everybody? In this video, we're going to go ahead and take a look at setting up data center objects inside of Vcenter Server and then adding ESXi hosts to those data centers so we can start working with them and getting them operational. So let's go ahead and take a look at diving into that. How's it going, everybody? In this video, we're going to go ahead and take a look at setting up our Vcenter Server appliance so that we can deploy ESXi hosts to it. Now let's just go to double check our PowerPoint real quick. Currently we have our setup to where we have management host 1, which is .30 inside of our subnet of 10.255.1.0/24. And what we're going to do is we're going to add this ESXi host to a data center known as the DC1-management or MGMT. And we're going to add this ESXi host to that particular that data center so that we have at least, so we're managing it. Then we're going to add in another data center known as DC1 for compute or comp. So vert host, we could rename this to be compute or comp host 1 for compute. This is going to be our compute data center or our compute nodes. We're going to go ahead and do all that, get them added to Vcenter Server, and then we'll be able to begin managing our implementation and all that type of stuff. So let's go ahead and take a look at deploying this on Vcenter Server. So underneath VCSA1, I'm going to go right click here and I'm going to create a new data center. In the name, I'm going to go ahead and call this DC1 dash, in this particular case it's going to be MGMT. I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. And now I have a data center, a management data center, right? I'm going to go ahead and right click here and create another one, new data center. I'm going to call this one DC1-compute or comp. Click on OK. And now that they're both added, you'll notice that they go in alphabetical order, right? The next thing I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to right click here. I'm going to click on add host. In the add host portion, I'm going to come in here and type in MGMT. And if you're not sure, but if you want to add it by name, I recommend you do that. If you have a DNS entry for it, great. That's what we want. We have MGMT-host1, which is what I want to do. If you add it by IP address, your IP address is going to show up of the ESXi host, where I would prefer a name so then you know what it is you're working with. So in this case, your host 1. I'm going to go ahead and click on next. And I'm going to go ahead and in here, I'm going to go and issue it's going to be root and the password. Click next. And if I've done everything correctly, we should get this output. Alpha or 8 delta 2 delta. If you're not sure if this is the right host, there's a really easy way to validate this. Come over here to our VMware workstation piece. We're going to come in here to the management host. So make sure you select this particular tab over to management host. Click inside of it. Go F2 to log in. Issue the password. And then we're going to go down here to view support information. And if you look right here, it says alpha or 8 delta 2 delta. So we know we had the right SSL thumbprint. So we know we're good to go there. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. I know this is correct. I'm going to say yes. And I'm going to go ahead and click on, and the name is management-host1.lab.local. I'm going to click next. Assign license. We're just going to use the standard evaluation license, which is good for 60 days. Click next. Lockdown mode. I'm not going to do any lockdown. But what this basically means is when you do normal, the host is accessible only through the local console or the Vcenter server, which is normal operations, right? Nothing significant there. Then you have strict. The host is accessible only through the Vcenter server. The DCUI service is stopped. In other words, if I was to come back over here, this right here that we just entered into, we click escape or press escape. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the direct console user interface, the DCUI. I know I've covered this in a previous video, but this is the DCUI. If you want to disable this, you can. I don't recommend you do it though, but it is an option if you want to do so. I'm going to say no, we don't want to mess with that. VM location, we don't have any VMs running currently on it. Actually, that's incorrect. We had the Vcenter Server appliance. So DC management 1 is our VM location. We're going to say, yep, that's fine. And we're going to go ahead and have it added. So I'm going to go ahead and click the little icon down here at the bottom, and you can see that it's adding a standalone host. So it's almost there. We're going to go ahead and expand management, and we can see that it's in the process of being added. If I grab this and scoot it over just a little bit, you're going to see that management host 1.lab.local has now been added. If I click on it, now we're going to be looking at the host level details that we can play with. So as you go from Vcenter Server level, you have a lot of options here at the top, right? If you go down here to the data center level, you have a few less options, right? Pretty much the same amount of options that you would have for a host level. Come down here to the host level, same thing, and now we're down at the host level. If you look at the management level of the data center, whatever is going on, if you only have one host, whatever is going on in that host is going to be reflective up here. If we click on the Vcenter Server appliance and we come back over here to summary, you're going to see that all the totality of all of the ESXi hosts that are running, their outputs are going to be showing up here on the right hand side. Now if I was to click on DC1-compute, I don't have any hosts in it, and that's reflective over here on the right hand side. Nothing is there. So I'm going to go ahead and right click here and say add host. And just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to show you guys how to add an ESXi host via IP address. So we're going to look at vert host 1 10.255.1.22. So I'm going to go ahead and click inside of here. I'm going to type in 10.255.1.22 and click on next. I'll eventually get rid of the host, just so you guys are aware. I'm going to come in here and type in root and then the password. And it's going to go out and ask. I'm going to go ahead and say, yep, that's probably accurate. Yes. Click next. Assign license. We're going to be using the license that we showed you guys how to use to deploy. It's 2 CPUs. I got a capacity of 12. Or I could use the evaluation license. So you guys won't be able to see this as we're going forward, but I'll have this all blurred out. Click on next, and VM location, next, and then finish. So then it's going to go ahead and add this. I'm going to go ahead and expand this out, and the problem with this is going to be it's only going to show me the IP address. This is the lackluster part of it. It doesn't show us the name. Unless there's been an update to it that I'm not aware of, it should not give us any updates or information on the host itself. We have VM-2-Windows deployed. So if we were to come down here and now we have a VM deployed, we can look at the VM levels. So we can manage our virtual machines from Vcenter Server as well. So pretty straightforward stuff, right? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to right click here. I'm going to add an additional host. And this time I'm going to type in vert host 2. And the password here is going to, or the username is going to be root. The password, I'm going to hit the enter key. And that is the SSL thumbprint. Let's see, yeah, that's fine. Next, our way through it, assign a license. I'm going to go ahead and use the license. I'm going to continue to use the evaluation license in this particular case. I could license all of these servers if I wanted to, and I probably will eventually. Now you notice how it says vert-host2.lab.local because we added it by name and not by IP up here. We're eventually going to go ahead and get rid of this host. The host is now added. I'm going to go ahead and add another host. Add host. This one's going to be vert-host3. Enter key. Root and the password. Go ahead and agree with the SHA-1 thumbprint, and then next. We're going to go ahead and use the eval license, and then just next all the way through, and we're in good shape. Now you can see vert-host3.lab.local. So in this particular case, everything's looking pretty good, right? If we expand this guy right here, we'll see that there is VM1-Linux. So what I'm going to go do is, now that they're all added, now if we click on this guy and we look at this, it's going to tell us that SSH for the host has been enabled. That's why we get a little triangle with the exclamation point in it saying, hey, this is probably a problem. So let me go ahead and actually get rid of this particular host and rejoin it as the name. I'm going to right click here and I'm going to say go down to connection. I'm going to say disconnect. It says, are you sure you want to disconnect it? Yep, I want to disconnect the host, or the host from Vcenter Server. And now it shows up as disconnected. And what I can do is, now that it's disconnected, you can refresh, right? You can refresh and all that good stuff, but it still says disconnected. Eventually it'll disappear, but I can hurry that process up and I can right click here and go remove from inventory. And then it says removing a host also removes all of its virtual machines, resource pools, and vapps. Yep, I do. In addition to past performance data, host level permissions, it's yada yada yada. I'm going to say yep, remove the host. And I will be able to re-add it here in just a moment. So it's going to go ahead and remove the host and all that good stuff that goes along with it. So this will take a couple of moments. Now the host has been removed. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to right click here and say add host back. And I'm going to type in vert-host 1, enter. Root is going to be our username, and then hit the enter key. That is the appropriate, yes, that's fine. Click next. We're going to use the license that we associated. Next, 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 and then finish. And then we're going to see vert-host1.lab.local show up here. It'll show up here momentarily and be in really good shape. So that's pretty much it. Now that we have our ESXi host added to Vcenter Server, now the real game can really begin. And so now that we have that added, we actually can start working with our deployment. So there's a couple things that we can take a look at from here on out. This is going to be host and cluster. So we're going to see the hosts. We have the VMs that belong to these hosts. Or these are the hosts themselves. This guy, and this guy, right? If we look under the data center, we can see that there are 3 hosts. There are 3 networks, 2 virtual machines, 4 data stores. So if we look over here, we can see that there's a total of 24 gigahertz of CPU. We can see that there's 48 gigs of RAM, and we've got about a terabyte of storage associated. We've got ourselves a lot more ability to add storage if we want to, which will come in handy down the road when we start talking about vSAN and other capabilities. But basically, this is where we're at. So if I was to come up, if we were to add a cluster, which we could, we're not going to do that right now because there's some things that we need to talk about before we get into clusters. I'm going to go ahead and click on VMs and Templates. So if we were to expand this, we're going to see 2 VMs here. If I expand this out, we're going to see 1 VM here. And they're all running. So that just gives you an indication that we can see the VMs and the templates, right? If we were to create templates out of any of the VMs we have deployed, we could then basically get a VM to where we need it to be, and we could then deploy new VMs from that template. So we're going to talk about how that comes into play in a later video. Over here on storage, we can see the storage that we have associated. I'm going to go ahead and expand these guys out. And we can see that there's a bunch of data stores here. So if you notice, we have Datastore 1, right? And then we have Datastore 1, and then in parentheses, there's another 1. If I was to click on this guy, this is going to tell me that if we click on the hosts that are associated to this, it's going to tell us that this is vert-host2. If I click on this one, this should tell me that it's vert-host-3. So there's an easy way to fix this. We want to rename a data store, which is what we want to do. I'm going to right click here. I'm going to go down to rename, and I'm going to rename this to be vert-host2. Go ahead and pull this back out. I'm going to type in vert-host2-hd1. And the reason I'm going to do that is because it helps provide context as to what it is. Click on OK. And the same thing with this guy. We know this is going to be host 3. So right click here, go down to rename, and then we're going to go ahead and say vert-host3-hd1. If we had additional hard drives, we could totally add them in as hard drive 2, hard drive 3, etc. And on this guy here, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing. Right click here, rename. I'm going to go ahead and name this guy mgmt-host1-hd1. And there we go. Pretty simple stuff. Now I can add more ESXi hosts for management and just name them management host 2, management host 3. So when we get into things like vCenter high availability, we're going to do that so that we have our VCSAs deployed on the management data center and not inside the compute. But that's another topic altogether. Now that we have this laid out, notice that SAN shows up here, and it says that only VirtHost 1 and VirtHost 2 are connected to it. That's because we haven't configured VirtHost 3 to be a member of that, which we will go ahead and take a look at doing in a different video when we get into playing around with it and stuff like that. We're going to add that in from a vCenter deployment. I just want to go through some of the basics of how this will work inside of Vcenter Server. The last one I'm going to do is the networking. So if I was to expand this out on compute, we're going to have a couple of different, these are going to be some of the networks that we have. Right, so we have the data network, and these are going to be port groups that are associated. Click on SAN, we have the SAN port group, and then we have the VM network. We can delete this if we wanted to. We don't need to keep it there. But this just gives you an idea of what's going on, and we have VM network here for the IP addressing. So that's basically how all this plays out. Now, here's where we really want to, we go back over here to the hosts. And this is where, when we do a lot of our configuration details, if I want to make a modification to something, I can totally do that right here. I can click on the host, and then I can come over here to configure. And if I want to modify anything, let's say I wanted to add any networking, I want to add in, for example, I want to add in iSCSI storage. Well, I could go through the steps in order to do that through Vcenter Server. I'm not going to do this right now. I'm going to do this in an upcoming video just so you guys can see this process. And we're going to get all of our servers squared away the way that they need to be. So I just wanted to give you a kind of a higher level overview as to what's going on. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is how you add host to Vcenter Server and provide a little bit of organization to it. It's pretty straightforward stuff for the most part. There's a lot, again, that we have not gotten to yet. So if you're itching to get deeper into it, I'm trying to keep these videos short and to the point. So hopefully that will work out for you in the long term. Now, a little bit of additional detail here for you in case you were wondering. If you click up here on menu, you have a lot of different additional options, right? You can, this one right here is hosting clusters, or I can click right here, or there's a keyboard shortcut for it. Same thing with VMs and templates, storage, networking. Content libraries is a way of sharing data between your data centers. So if, for example, I have I've deployed a vCenter server implementation and I have a data center in, say, LA. And I'm deploying a new vCenter server in Austin, for example, Austin, Texas. I can go through the whole process, and let's say I want to basically make Austin a secondary location to LA. Maybe it's centralized. I want to make sure that, maybe latency is a thing, and I want to make people in Texas, their latency a little bit less than traveling all the way to California. Whatever the business use case is, you can create a content library where the LA data center is going to be the source where all the VMs and templates are going to sit, and the ISO files and everything that needs to be there. You can basically configure a content library, and you can have the Austin data center subscribe to the LA data center. And what that's going to allow it to do is I can take all the stuff that's in LA and replicate it over to Austin through the content library. And then I can go in and I can start deploying my implementation and my data center in Austin however I see fit. Global inventory lists, fairly straightforward information. Policies and profiles, we'll click on that real quick. We have the ability of doing storage profiles, host profiles, and storage policy. We'll talk about more of this later when we get into optimizing our environment, and if we want to get into storage-based policy management and do vSphere auto deploy and things like that, where we deploy ESXi hosts on demand. Depending on the need, we can do that through using a host profile to configure our ESXi hosts. Auto deploy, if we wanted to do this, this would be a way to, we don't have anything built yet. That's why it's showing up the way that it does. But if we'd also have to turn the features on. So right now, auto deploy and image builder are turned off. So we'd have to turn them on and then go in there and configure them appropriately. If we were to come down here to vRealize operations, we don't have vRealize operations deployed. But if we did, we'd be able to synchronize this with vRealize or VROps, as I like to refer to it. I will deploy this so you guys can see how this comes into play. But basically what this would allow us to do is get an idea of how the environment is working. Maybe our VMs are too over provisioned on resources. Ops Manager is going to help us figure that out. Administration, if we click on it, this is where we can create global permissions and associate roles. So if there's something in here that we need to add for whatever reason, we can create a new role. We can add in Active Directory as an option if we want to do that. If we want to add in licensing, we could add in licenses. Right now we don't have any licenses added. We have one, but I'm going to have to go through and basically edit it out so you guys can't see it. So we have a license, and then we can associate this to any of our ESXi hosts. So if you wanted to do that, for example, if I want to click on this and go to assign, or they're already assigned to one host. So we're going to go to Assets, and if we want to click on Hosts, and I want to assign license, right now it's associated. We have Management Host 1 is in evaluation mode, so is Host 2 and Host 3. So if I was to click on these guys and associate assign license, they're going to go ahead and I'm going to be able to license those 3 hosts. We're going to go ahead and choose license 1, click on OK, and now they're all licensed. So now all of our ESXi hosts are licensed the way that they need to be, and we're in really good shape. So if we had more hosts, we could associate those licenses as well. If we go back over here, we can see that we have 8 CPUs that are associated to that, so we can use up to 2 more hosts we could deploy with 2 CPUs. So it's a total of 12 CPUs total. So if you have 6 servers, each server having 2 CPUs, 2 physical cores, or 2 physical CPUs, regardless of how many cores, you could go ahead and apply this license to that, and I could deploy up to 2 more ESXi hosts, which is actually works out quite well because I can deploy 2 more management ESXi hosts for when we get into Vcenter Server high availability and whatnot. We can deploy that and we'll be able to max out our license there. If we go into client plugins, right now we don't have anything really plugged in or turned on, but they are here if we want to use them. If we want to go to the server extensions, they're here if we want to use them. System configuration, if I wanted to modify how this guy is working, I could do so. I'm not currently going to, and we're in good shape here. I'm going to go ahead and in the customer experience improvement program, we are not joined, but if we wanted to, we could change that, where we want to send information to VMware. If we wanted to upload files to a service request, we could do that. If we want to add single sign-on, let's say we want to add in Active Directory. We don't want to manage individual devices or users or operations from vCenter itself. We can go down to here, the configuration. We can go to identity sources, and we can go add an identity source that is Active Directory. So maybe through Active Directory over LDAP, we can add in all the information that we need to in order to add AD, and then we can go into global permissions and users and groups, and then we can associate AD. It's not here yet, but if we wanted to, we could do that, and then add in AD as a Vcenter Server level role and authenticator, so we can allow all of our domain admins or our Vcenter Server admins or whatever we want to add, our vSphere admins group to that particular implementation and go from there. So we have that. So it does require a little bit of an understanding of how Microsoft Active Directory works. And then lastly, we have certificate management. If you wanted to modify the certificates used by Vcenter Server or the PSC, you could do that. And that's pretty much it. Everything else is going to be stuff that we're going to have to take a look at in more detail later when it comes down to the individual topics that we're going to be hitting. So be patient. We're going to get there. It's just going to take us some time. This is going to be something that you're going to definitely want to spend some time on if you are wanting to dive into this in more detail later. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for stopping by and hanging out with me. I will catch all of you in the next video. Take it easy, guys.